So welcome again to the New Hampshire Food Alliance webinar series. Thank you for joining us today. Today we're going to be talking about agriculture commissions, keeping farming viable and vibrant in your community. And we have guests John Carroll, who's UNH Emeritus Professor and a member of the Durham Agricultural Commission with us today. And joining us as well will be John Boscawen, a UNH Extension... John Porter, excuse me, UNH Extension Emeritus from the Boscawen Agricultural Commission. John Carroll, we'll start with you. Could you give us just a brief introduction to just your work and how you got involved with the Durham Agricultural Commission?
Okay, well, first of all, I'm pleased to be here representing the Durham Agricultural Commission. All 12 members of the commission are delighted that you're focusing on this important subject, a subject that could be much better utilized in our state, and we're glad that we have it, but we need to spread the word and get more commissions. I've been on the Durham Agricultural Commission since day one, perhaps 6 or 7 years ago when we got started. And it's been a wonderful experience working with the town government in that way. As many people know, I'm now Professor Emeritus of Environmental Conservation at UNH, and I focused in the last 15 years or so very heavily and very directly on local food and farming. Legislation, policy, and of course the practice of local food and farming. So I've been very glad to bring that to the fore in the context of my own town and the commission on which I serve. The idea of another kind of town commission, the Town Conservation Commission, was born in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in the 1960s and spread throughout the 6 New England states. Massachusetts also gave birth to something called the Town Agricultural Commission. That was in the 1990s, and these commissions have spread most notably to New Hampshire, as well as being very well represented within the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So we owe Massachusetts a double debt of gratitude for both the Town Conservation Commission, which we perhaps take for granted these days, and the Town Agricultural Commission as well. The role of the commission in Massachusetts in the early years, in the 1990s on up to the present, has been very heavy in the area of mediation. Mediation between the farmers on the one hand and the residents of the towns on the other, in order to resolve problems, issues, disputes, things of that sort. And then secondarily, to be a very, very strong force of encouragement for the very active agricultural commissions in Massachusetts. And there are numbers of very active commissions within the Commonwealth. I spoke of mediation because we're speaking of 2 different cultures here. There's the agrarian culture, which would have characterized virtually all of New England from the beginning of European settlement up to at least the end of the 1950s or early 1960s. But there is also the suburban culture, which has become much more dominant in many, many parts of New England from the 1960s up to the present. And it is the suburban culture that has become separated from agriculture or agrarian culture, as we might call it. So consequently, there's grounds for dispute. There are large numbers of people living in New England who are more in the suburban culture and who do not have a clear understanding of the needs of agriculture and of farmers and how to have a successful agrarian or agricultural economy within the town. So therefore, there has been need for mediation. That being said, however, I would say that our own work in the Durham Agricultural Commission, while it has had some involvement with mediation of disputes between townspeople and so forth, our bigger role has been twofold. First and foremost, to educate our townspeople to the wonderful benefits of local food and farming and the benefits that local food and farming add to the quality of life within the town. And given that benefit to the quality of life within the town, our role has been to influence the town master planning and town zoning so as to both protect and expand agricultural practice within the town. And I might quickly add, this is on the gardening level as much as it is on the agricultural level. We regard the two as essentially one and the same.
Great. Wonderful. So, so you've told us about some of the things that agricultural commissions do in general and some of the things that you've done here in Durham. Could you talk a little bit more about maybe a specific project or issue that you've worked on here in Durham?
Yes, there are a number of different things we could talk about here. First of all, I want to mention that I wrote a full chapter on the town agricultural commissions for a book of mine called Pastures of Plenty, published by UNH, and that is available free electronically. So information will be provided to you as to how to get a copy of that book, which is getting out of print, as well as The Real Dirt and Live Free and Farm, Food and Independence in the Granite State. So these are all available to all people in New Hampshire at no charge electronically.
And I think Jennifer is putting the links in the chat function here for you.
Okay, very good. Okay, well, some of the activities of the Durham Agricultural Commission, there is, of course, the annual Farm Day every August. This is an all-day event on a selected Saturday in August, and we've had it now for perhaps about 6 years. It is very well attended by townspeople and visitors to the town. Requires a great deal of work. We have host farmers and host gardeners and tour leaders and things of that sort, and it's a fun day for everyone. It's called Durham Farm Day every August. That has been an ongoing and very busy activity of the Durham Agricultural Commission. We have an agricultural presence, or agrarian presence, you might say, in numerous town activities and events. Durham Day at the end of September, which is a traditional Saturday at the end of September when the town sort of celebrates itself. The Agricultural Commission is very well represented in those activities. The Agricultural Commission, or AgCom, as we call it, is also well represented in the Memorial Day Parade and festivities every May. And in a wide variety of other activities in the town, we've become an important contributing member to those activities so that the townspeople are really getting to know who we are and the kind of work that we're doing. We've raised the position of agriculture in the minds of the people of Durham. Agriculture now has a very prominent position in the town master plan, the official master plan of the town, and it occupies one full chapter devoted to the work of the Agricultural Commission and to the work of agriculture in the town. Not a portion of a chapter, but a full chapter. This is a major accomplishment of the Commission. It took a great deal of work to do that. We have worked on and passed specific ordinances to both permit and encourage the keeping of chickens, of turkeys, and of goats across most of the town. And this is all now allowable in town zoning. So it's been an important accomplishment of the Commission. We've been responsible for the establishment of community gardens involving over 120 plots and nearly 100 gardeners on town land in the farmland, which is owned by the town and is available to all. It's called Wagon Hill Farm. So that's another very important activity of the Durham Agricultural Commission. We are now, thanks to the AgCom, Bee City USA. We're recognized as the only Bee City USA in the entire New England region. There is no other in the region. All of the others are in the South, Southeast, the Midwest, the Far West, and so on. So Durham is a Bee City USA, and that means that we support, protect, and encourage not only bees, but pollinators in general, because we recognize how important pollinators are to our food source. It's not just a question of getting honey from bees. It's a question of successfully pollinating maybe 30 or 40% of our fruit and vegetables by the bees. So we are a Bee City USA and a major protector and encourager of bees. We also encourage people who wish to raise bees for honey or for any other reason to do so, and we help them out. We are now playing in Durham a significant current involvement in amending our town zoning ordinance through the adoption of the state definition of agriculture with a little modification as appropriate to our town. But this is perhaps, some would say, the single most important activity that the Durham Agricultural Commission has ever been involved in, because we have a very important and powerful state definition of agriculture, and we're bringing that into Durham. There are countless other activities that the 12-member commission has been involved with, and I want to say that people here in Durham are very excited about the commission. We have a full membership of 12. We've never had less than 12. And on average, about 11 people show up for the monthly meetings. That's an incredible average count. So people are enthusiastic and excited about the Durham Agricultural Commission. And if I may say so myself, it's one of the most popular of the various Durham town committees, commissions, and boards. It's important also to recognize that the commission is a commission, not a committee. It exists under state resolution and state law. So it's similar to the Conservation Commission in that sense. It is not judicial in its nature. It does not have any judicial power, but it is an official commission with the blessings of the state government and not simply a town committee. But it's very, very popular and has been very successful.
Wonderful. Thank you, John, for sharing all of that. And I have a question for you. So in our first webinar, we learned about New Hampshire's right to farm law and the difficulties that some of our farmers face when dealing with town land use laws. What role maybe do agricultural commissions in general play, and maybe are there any specific issues that you can think of that have come up in Durham where the Agriculture Commission has really helped to mediate an issue of land use?
Yes, well, I'll answer the second part of that first. There have been a few concerns by neighbors over their neighbors having chickens. And there are people who don't like chickens and so forth. So we've had to mediate in a few cases. We had one dairy farm issue where there were concerns among townspeople as to how the farm was operating, and we mediated that, and hopefully we educated both sides. Both sides need to understand what is necessary in order to have a dairy, or to have chickens, or to have goats, or whatever. But we operate on the assumption not that it's important to have an agricultural commission because you do have or don't have farmers. It's important to have an agricultural commission because we all eat. If a town has a population of human beings who eat, then it should have an agricultural commission, because the town is involved in the production and the processing, preparation, and distribution of food, as long as it has people in the town who can eat. Obviously, that's everyone, so that we should have an agricultural commission in all of our towns. But we've had a little bit, therefore, of mediating experience in Durham, and I would anticipate over future years there would be more such activity. But it's not a dominant part of the Durham Agricultural Commission's activities.
Okay. Thank you. So that's helpful, and I like that definition. Just sort of, if you're eating, you should have an agricultural commission. So that means it's not limited to just rural towns in New Hampshire, or towns that have a significant portion of lands in agriculture, but potentially even urban. More urban.
We
towns.
like to say on the Durham Agricultural Commission, if you eat, you're in.
Great. Hi, John. How are you? So we're going to try to have you join here by speakerphone. And John Carroll has been sharing with us some of what's been happening at with the Durham Agricultural Commission. Would you be able to introduce yourself just briefly? Tell us how you got involved in the Boscawen Agriculture Commission.
Okay. I'm John Porter. I'm kind of semi-retired with Good Age Cooperative Extension. I live in Boscawen. I guess kind of a part-time farmer. I do small vegetable crops and blueberries and so forth. And so when the Ag Commission came available, I was interested in joining. I went on first as an alternate. About a year ago, became a regular member. And I feel our Commission has been quite active. We've always had some projects, which I think has been key to its success. And in fact, right now we're working on a thing to look at some, maybe a statewide thing where we could find some ways to get some tax relief for farmers and kind of have a 79E, which is made for developing industry, but have that applied to agriculture for some tax relief on new ag buildings and things. So we've always got some little project going. We've had new entry signs to Boscawen, welcoming people and saying that we support local agriculture. We've done some market studies about kitchens, and so I think we've had a pretty active group.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So we talked with John Carroll a bit about the role that ag commissions play in terms of mediating some of the difficult land use issues between farmers and other developers. Have you experienced any of that in Boscawen? Has your commission been involved in any mediation issues at all?
A little bit, but just on a very informal basis because they've all had good outcomes. Basically, our town boards respect the Ag Commission, and they often send us out on field trips to look at sites and give recommendations on some of these controversial things that come up. And they accept our recommendations. And to this point, we've had some pretty mutually agreeable solutions and have been able to resolve things. And like you say, they respect us and our knowledge in agriculture and use our recommendations when they have to make decisions.
Wonderful. And it sounds like you've done some outreach, like they've done a lot here in Durham in terms of signage and other things. Are there events and other sorts of activities that the Agriculture Commission puts on in Boscawen?
Well, we've gotten quite a lot of coverage this spring about helping to sponsor the community gardens. In fact, we were a front page article along with Concord about community gardens. We participated in Old Home Day events and parades before. And, we're pretty well recognized as an advocate for agriculture in town. And we actually like to claim that we help attract the big chicken operation, which was getting kicked out of a lot of towns. And we welcomed into Boscawen and like to think the Ag Commission had quite a bit to do with bringing a commercial poultry operation to town.
That's great. Could you tell us a little bit more about that story and the role that the Ag Commission played?
Well, that was the Pete and Jerry story with Tom Givigagnoli, and he was trying to put a 20,000 bird house up. He tried in Dunbarton and was kicked out. He tried in Ware and was kicked out. And Boscawen wrote him a letter and welcomed them and also communicated with the Pete and Jerry's directly and told them we'd like to talk with them, and we helped them through the planning and zoning things. And as a result of that, he built his 20,000 bird operation in Boscawen.
Wow, that's great. So that was when you said Boscawen contacted him, was that the Agriculture Commission in Boscawen or the Agriculture Commissioners communicating with the town administrators about that issue?
Well, the commission had quite a bit to do with it, and we work in conjunction with our town. We have a person who kind of works as a land use person and manager. He's also ex officio on our board, so he was very aware of what was going on. So we worked in harmony, with the town and with the town boards, and then got him on the agendas and helped explain what he was trying to do and welcomed him to town. And then Pete and Jerry's, which was just about ready to give up on establishing another poultry operation in this area, because of the welcoming attitude of the town, pursued it further and helped support Tom in doing his operation, and he's on his second year now.
Oh, great. Great. Thanks for sharing that story. So for some of the folks who might be listening here today who'd be interested in helping to start an agriculture commission in their town, maybe John Carroll, could you jump in and let us know what the process would be for communities who'd like to start? a commission?
Okay. Well, first, John, let me say hello, and it's a pleasure to be on the program with you.
Well, it's good to hear. Good to hear it, John.
Right.
I know we've done a lot of things together.
Right, we certainly have, and your work in the barns and in the history of dairy industry in New Hampshire are really legendary and an important contribution here. So pleased to be with you.
Well, thank you.
Obviously, people need to be approaching their select boards or their town councils or even their city councils, because cities can have agricultural commissions in New Hampshire as well. But it's a matter of getting an ordinance passed with the encouragement of the state legislation. And I think many select board members as well as councilors are confident when they see the encouragement that comes from the state of New Hampshire. The state wants our towns and cities to do this. We should be doing it. The state wants it. The state supports it. And if there are sufficient people within the town who are willing to serve on it. We have a commission of 12 in Durham, and I was saying a little bit earlier that it's always full, and on average 11 people show up for the monthly meetings. So there's plenty of excitement here, and I'm hearing some similar repetition of this behavior in other towns as well. So people are excited about it, and certainly the town council or the select board or the city council should go along with it and prepare the appropriate ordinance that ties in with the state legislation.
Great. And I believe too, John, I'm gonna, I have a link, and maybe Jennifer actually just put in the chat function a link to all of the current list of towns with agriculture commissions that we have right now. And on your screen right now, this is a link to a document about creating an agriculture commission in your town as well. So we'll put that link up in the chat as well. So, so John Porter, could you tell us a little bit about the membership on your Agriculture Commission? What kinds of representation is it important to have on the Agriculture Commission?
Okay. To be honest, I had a hard time getting commercial agricultural people on our board. They tend to be part-timers and people who have been in town a while, or people who like agriculture, or people who are farming on a small scale. And we actually could use 1 or 2 more members. But we've had a good dedicated hardcore group that stayed with us. And but we could use a few more members, and we would like to be able to include more commercial folks. So I think, to be honest, they're really busy. And we have mostly hobbyists and people who really support agriculture.
Wonderful, great. So I'd like to also make sure that I know that folks have been joining us throughout the hour. Feel free to type in any questions that you have for John Carroll or John Porter, either in our chat function, or you can use the hand raising function if you'd like us to call on you. Once we're done with our discussion here, we'll open it up for more questions, but feel free to type in your questions as we go as well. So, so I have a question for both of you. I have a friend who recently moved actually to Lee and she's got a 5-acre piece of land with a hoop house and some berry bushes, and she's interested in starting a small agricultural enterprise, but she doesn't really have any experience. What could an agricultural commission do to help out sort of somebody who's interested in kind of getting into farming, even on a small scale?
Okay, well, let me say first off that since we're talking about Lee, it should be known and recognized that the first agricultural commission in the state of New Hampshire is the Lee Town Agricultural Commission, and all of the rest of the commissions, including our own in Durham, have followed the leadership of Lee and have used the Lee model. There are fine people who are Lee residents who have served on that commission from the very beginning, and I'm sure they would be more than happy to serve and encourage any Lee resident who wants to become involved in agriculture. Let me say also, in terms of membership on the commission, that I think for reasons of credibility, it's very important, if at all possible, that the chair of the commission and perhaps also the vice chair be active farming people. Whether that's at the hobby level or more significant doesn't matter, but it's important that they be farming people, whereas the membership can be a much greater cross-section of the community. But it needs to be people who are working the land agriculturally, who provide the leadership for the commission, I think, in any town.
Thank you. Yeah, that seems very important. So is there a way that the agricultural commissions throughout the state are working together? It sounds like, John Porter, you mentioned that your group is trying to think about tax relief policy. Are you communicating with other agricultural commissions, or is there a formal way that the commissions are organized?
We seem to do it informally. We've been talking with the Durham and Lee Commission about some of the things we've been thinking about, because we know there's been a lot of creative things. We've also just gone and visited other towns that are interesting commissions. We've been to Stratham, we've been over in the Keene area, and so forth. So people have learned about our group, and we've gone to their meetings to talk to them. And then the Farm and Forest Expo tends to be a little bit of a networking possibility for commissions. There's usually something with the Ag Coalition put on that helps bring the commissions together. And that's usually the main thing that we link into is Farm and Forest. But informally, yeah, we know the people, and like I said, we lean on Lee and Durham quite a bit. We see them as the leaders.
Wonderful, great. So I'd love to open it up to John and John, if there are other things that you'd like to discuss about the agriculture commissions, again, in general, or work that you've done specific to your town, or if you know of other towns and ag commissions that are doing really interesting work. I'd also, again, really encourage folks who are who are listening to the webinar to please type in your questions for us, because we'd like to be able to respond. We've got John and John here to answer those questions for you.
Well, I would say that it's important for all New Hampshire residents to realize that our state constitution, over 200 years of state statutes, all support and encourage agriculture. Our state is very friendly to the encouragement of agriculture. And most recently, we have this new piece of legislation, New Hampshire RSA 425-2A, which is better known as Granite State Farm to Plate. The Republican State Senate, the Democratic State House of Representatives at that time, and Governor Maggie Hassan at that point established in law this important piece of legislation, which says that our state, all of its state agencies, and all of the local governments, the municipalities of our state, are directed to both support and encourage local food and farming and the processing of locally produced food wherever they occur in our state. So no town or city and no state agency should stand in the way of agricultural development, so that we may continue to have a secure local source of food at all times within the state.
Great, thanks, John. Anything else you'd like to add, John Porter?
Well, it's like I say, for us, the key to our success, I think, has been projects. And if we don't have a project, it seems like we kind of slump and our attendance goes down, and the projects keep us going. And we've had a lot of them. Another one that just came to mind is we were studying the feasibility of having a commercial kitchen in Boscawen. We actually were able to get a USDA grant to study this, and the outcome wasn't what we were hoping, but at least it told us something, because the outcome of the study showed that a commercial kitchen wasn't viable in Boscawen, but other people have been interested in the outcome of that study, and it actually kind of showed that maybe a different paradigm in the commercial kitchens, and then we sort of concluded that a kitchen that would be shared amongst producers ought to have one main stakeholder who was a commercial enterprise, and then they let people use it versus the old pattern that we had of sort of everybody owned it, nobody claimed it, and then they kind of failed. So the study showed that we should go ahead. We had a couple of in-town buildings we were pursuing, but it showed we should do it, and that it opened up this idea of joining in with a commercial person, and I think that's been done a little bit over in the Warner area.
Oh, really? Okay. That would be great. Maybe we can get some more information about that success story and share it with the network. So we do have a question that came in through the chat. Is there a national contact for urban ag commissions to network with one another about their unique needs? What are some of the key issues urban ag commissions are advocating for? So I don't know if John, you have any thoughts about that?
Well, one of the most prominent in New Hampshire is the issue of refugees and agriculture, and this centers around Manchester. There's very active activity in the Manchester area, working with refugees who are farmers. Many of the refugees who come to our country from Africa and from Asia are farmers. And Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine are all very active with the refugees. Our center of such activity tends to be Manchester. And this, of course, leads to serious garden production, not hobby gardens, but more market gardens, but at the garden level rather than the farm level. And it also leads to significant participation in the farmers markets, in the local farmers markets. Burlington, Vermont, for example, has a separate farmers market hosted by the refugees in that area, which meets in the middle of the week, whereas the big city farmers market meets on Saturdays. So there's a lot that can be done in that area as well.
Wonderful. John, did you have any thoughts to add to that question?
I think John is more familiar with that.
Okay. Okay, and I think Jennifer also put up a link. One of the other things that that has gained some traction are food councils, and Nashua currently has a food council. So again, this is something that's really looking, a group of people similar to an agriculture commission, but that's looking sort of more than just agricultural production, and is looking at issues such as food access, hunger, nutrition, those kinds of things as well that might be sometimes more salient in the urban community. So we put a link to the Nashua Food Council there. Any other questions from listeners? Great. Yeah, so John, back to the question about looking at the food hubs. Is there any forward movement now in Boscawen for helping to start an enterprise that you just talked about?
No, not really. Like you said, we did that study, and that was well worth it, because we were heading down a trail of converting an old police department or an old library, and it showed there just wasn't a commitment there to do this.
Okay.
So even though the study didn't give us, what we were kind of hoping, it saved a lot of aggravation and probably saved a lot of lost money.
Right.
And I think got people thinking a little differently about the this.
That's great. So again, I think highlighting another role that agriculture commissions can play in terms of doing some research or feasibility studies about agricultural enterprises in the town. Are there any other examples that either of you know about that sort of, the role that commissions can play in terms of research?
Yes, one that comes to my mind is the idea that there are often industrial scale kitchens in the churches of a town, kitchens that are very significantly underutilized. And there also may be surplus kitchens in the school district, within the school system as well, at the more industrial scale. So these are things to consider looking into when it comes to the question of food preparation.
Wonderful, thanks. Great. Was there anything else that either of you wanted to make sure that we talked about today in relationship to our ag commissions in New Hampshire?
Well, I'd just like to re-emphasize the point that it's good that the Ag Commission be credible with the zoning and planning boards and other town committees. I think that's the key to our group because they trust us and they send us out to check out these different proposals that come before their boards. And when we come back with a formal report that we submit, and that's presented in those hearings. And I know the people always thank us because they're so pleased to have some advocates to help them in the process. And a lot of these, which may have been turned down or misunderstood or postponed or whatever, they take our report, and sometimes we'll have conditions that we think ought to happen with that, and they put that as part of it, and it allows this to happen. And we've had just a lot of successful cases, and many people come back and thank us.
Wonderful.
I would add to that also that here in Durham, we have the official representation of both the town council, we don't have a select board, it's a town council elected, and also of the planning board, because the council has a council rep to the Agricultural Commission, and most recently now, the planning board has a council rep, or I should say a planning board rep to the Agricultural Commission. And the planning board rep is a former member of the Agricultural Commission. So he hits the ground running in terms of his understanding of the work. So we work very closely with the council and with the planning board to make sure that everyone is on the same page, that there are no serious misunderstandings and so forth, as we help to re-educate our people, our suburban culture, over to the agrarian culture, which is certainly coming back with great force and great significance. There is no question whatsoever about that. But I think that's the way to go, to be intimately involved with the planning board and to be intimately involved with either the select board or the town council, as the case may be.
Great, thanks.
And in Boscawen, just another comment about our board. Just like a lot of towns have different committees and boards and groups that are trying to attract commercial enterprises, Boscawen wants to be known as recruiting agricultural enterprises. And that's something very, very common on our Ag Commission, and also why we're pursuing the statewide interest of maybe some tax relief for new farm buildings and things. We want to be seen as recruiting agriculture to Boscawen.
Great.
Good.
Wonderful. One other thing that we didn't touch on at all is the role that the commissions play in preserving agricultural history, so historic farms and farm buildings. Is that something that Durham and Boscawen are involved in as well?
Well, in Boscawen, we actually were asked to put together a supplemental chapter to the master plan, and we had to have a person on our commission who was on the Historical Society and had access to the records and everything, and she put together a very complete, nice agricultural history of Boscawen, which is now attached to the master plan. And then because on the commission, I also work with Old Barns and so forth, so I do a little bit of mediation between folks trying to get relief for tax on their barn with 79D. And so anything related to agriculture, our town kind of really relies back on the commission to help with. So we've gotten involved with some of the 79D things with some barns looking for tax easement. And we did have input into the master plan with a really nice chapter.
Great.
Right. Another thing that could be said here in terms of connectivity is to keep connected to our state's Commissioner of Agriculture. Certainly, Lorraine Stewart Merrill, our former commissioner, knew a great deal about the town agricultural commissions, had much to say, had done a lot of careful thinking and was very supportive. Steve Taylor came a little bit before the advent of the AgComs, but Steve knows the AgComs very, very well. And now we need to make sure that Commissioner Sean Jasper has a very clear understanding of how the AgComs can be used for very productive purposes to increase and enhance agriculture in the state. As far as the history is concerned, it's interesting to note that the official town histories of all of the towns and cities in the state are, by definition, heavily agricultural, because most of our towns, except for the mill cities, most of our towns were agricultural towns. So that's an inherent part of their history, and all of the current townspeople should realize that.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you both so much. I've learned a ton about agriculture commissions. I'll say again, if you've got any questions, please feel free to either use the hand raising function, or you can type in your question to the chat function. In general, we usually leave the last few minutes of our webinars for a chance for folks who are listening to the webinar to share updates, events, any resources that they have, sort of a chance for folks to connect remotely across the state. So at this point, we'd love to transition. Again, feel free, if you've got more questions for John Carroll or John Porter, to ask those. But also, if you have something that you'd like to share with other folks who are listening here today, feel free to do that. I'll say we do have another webinar coming up in June, and in that webinar, we will be talking about regional groups that are working to support regional food systems. So the Monadnock Farm and Community Coalition, Seacoast Eat Local, the Mount Washington Valley Growers and Eaters, North Country Food Co-op will be doing a similar format where we'll invite representatives from these different regional initiatives to come and tell us what they've been up to. Anything to share from anyone else? Any last words, John or John, before we head out?
Well, I would simply say that we are really talking food security here. It's a serious subject. It is a subject that some people don't focus on or don't wish to focus on, but we need to have in New Hampshire much greater ability to feed ourselves. Not totally, not by any means, but much greater ability. It's got to go above the 10% or 15% that we now do. We need to get up there to 40%, 50%, 60%, something along those lines. And it's going to have to be done very significantly at the town level in small-scale enterprises. And never underestimate the amount of productivity one can get from a garden, especially from a garden which is supported by some animal agriculture for purposes of fertility, as well as economic diversity. So the town agricultural commissions need to play a vital role in working very, very closely with the rest of town government and with state government in achieving this. It's a very, very important work that we're at, and we should realize food security is critical.
Great. Yeah, agricultural commissions can be sort of the grassroots engine of local food production.
That's right.
And economies, right?
That's right.
Well, thank you, John Carroll and John Porter, so much for your time and sharing your experience with us. Thanks to the rest of you who joined us today, and we hope to talk with you again next month.